Today, I'm going to try something that I've never done before. Writing an app without typing a single line of code. That or this whole video is going to be a complete disaster if ChatGPT actually can't write Swift. I guess we'll find out. Okay, so there's a couple basic rules that I have to follow here, and the first one is everything has to come straight out of ChatGPT. I can't massage or finagle anything that comes out of it if it doesn't work right out of the box. I have to literally copy paste it into my code. I can choose where to copy paste it into, but that's about it. Number two, I have to use publicly available ChatGPT. It's completely free. I don't have access to any internal previews or anything like that, which means in theory, anyone watching this could do exactly what I'm doing, which is kind of the point. And number three, I have to do this entire thing in less than 4 hours. I'm starting from zero. I have an idea of what I want to do, but I haven't even created the project or put any prompts into ChatGPT yet. So we're really starting from nothing. Honestly, I'm a little bit nervous to see how this goes because this is gonna be my first time actually trying to write any substantial body of code using an AI assistant. And it's possible that I am gravely overestimating the abilities of this thing, especially for using Swift, because I have no clue how it does with Swift. So yeah, this video might be a complete catastrophe. I don't know. Oh gosh, I don't even know how to get started at this. Let's just start with some really basic stuff, like just putting things on the screen. I don't know how specific I'm going to need to be with this. I suspect there are going to be some things where it's a lot of trial and error. Let's see what it gives me. I guess another thing I should point out, just because of the nature of how ChatGPT outputs code, I don't have to copy the entire block, so I can pull pieces of the output. I just can't manipulate any of that output. So if it doesn't actually generate the code, I can't type any of it myself. I think I already said that before, but I'll say it again. This is gonna be really hard not to manually manipulate the code at all. I've never done anything like this. Okay, let's try running it. Is it even gonna build? Okay, it's building. No way. Okay. I know I just put a label on the screen. We have a lot more that we're gonna need to do than putting a label on the screen, but that's actually a really good start. So let's try to get it to make a text field. So it also created the label that I mentioned in the first part. That's gonna be a problem. It doesn't know that I already have things that are named certain things. So now I have multiple things that are named leading constraint and trailing constraint. Okay, I'm just trying to get something working right now. I'm not trying to make it pretty. So maybe for right now, instead of worrying about getting it positioned right below the other thing, I'm just going to center it in the, center it vertically in the middle of the view controller. It's not gonna be pretty, but at least that solves the problem of relative constraints for now. Because I just kind of want to make early progress here. Okay, that's incredibly ugly, but it does work. We'll make that prettier later. I'm gonna be really disappointed if I leave it like that in the final version. Okay, so I think the next thing that it makes sense to do, I haven't built any of the logic in for actually like logging in with a password and remembering a password and setting an initial password. So there's a lot of stuff still to do on the first screen, but I kind of want to start building out the table view on the second page, and that's where all the logins are going to be. So any site that you have a login for, it's going to list the names of all of them. You tap into it, you then go to the next page, which is the login details page. So I kind of want to start populating this table view. This is going to be the most complicated thing that I've had this set up for me yet, and I think this could be the place where I start running into some issues with like small typos and things not working quite right and needing to keep putting in more prompts to get it to do exactly what I want. But so far everything's worked really well, so I'm optimistic that I'm gonna tell it make me a table view and it's gonna do basically exactly what I want it to do first try, which would be really great. Okay, I do not have a lot of confidence in what this is gonna do. Okay, so that was actually really nice. I thought I was gonna have to do that in multiple operations, which is I was gonna have to tell it I wanted my data source to be from a certain place from a type that didn't actually exist yet, but it just made that type for me. So it created a struct called login, so I don't need to go manually make that myself. It made an array, it made an example list of logins for me, named login 1, login 2, login 3. Obviously we're not going to keep that, but for now that's actually pretty nice just to see if things populate correctly. So I'll take that. Okay, so one thing I should point out as I'm kind of working on all of this is I do still have a lot of knowledge from writing Swift apps of what I want things to do. So if you've never written an app before in iOS or Swift, you still probably need an effective way of communicating with ChatGPT, of telling it exactly what you want to do in precise enough terms that it understands, or just more broadly computer science. If you've never worked in object-oriented programming, explaining the concept of a class to it or what you want different things to do and what the data source is going to be for a table view might not be something that you immediately think of. So the fact that I'm having good success with this on the first try doesn't necessarily mean that if you've never coded anything before that you can just pick this up and start getting things to print out. But this is really neat. This actually did populate a table view, and it's giving me login 1, login 2, login 3. When I click them, it doesn't do anything. That's totally okay. I didn't tell it to do anything for me yet. Wow, this is actually going way faster than I expected. To give you a point of reference, it's currently, I mean, I still have a lot to do, but I don't think I expected to be this far along this quickly. And I think another thing about this is it's already very much making me rethink about how I write Swift apps, because I do a lot of this stuff regularly, writing this code manually. A lot of this is just boilerplate, and if ChatGPT can actually write it this well, this is probably going to completely change the way that I write code from now on, at least basic code. We'll see how this does with things that are a little more complicated. This could seriously speed up my workflow. Okay, so at this point, I'm going to start getting into a little bit of the logic of actually how to set and store a password. Small disclaimer, whatever comes out of this is not representative of what you should actually be doing when it comes to managing your passwords. Managing passwords with a password manager is a very good idea. Putting them in something like this that you design yourself is a very bad idea. I don't want anyone to take this out of context and think that this is good software design. I think that's going to be the moral of this whole video, which is don't think anything that I'm doing in here is good software design. Okay, so I'm going to go back to the earlier logic where I said if the master password was empty to do one thing, and then now I'm going to have it generate that code again, but with an else condition saying that if the master password isn't empty, we need to compare it against the contents of that text field to check if everything is the same. And if not, we're not going to take the segue. Maybe we pop up an error message. I'm not going to bother with that for now. And if the field is the same as what's stored in our user defaults, then we're going to take the segue and essentially say that we logged the person in. This is kind of our first real piece of logic here. We're going to enter a password. It's going to be all caps, test123, hit submit. We go to the next page. Great. Okay, and let's restart it. So if I just do random stuff, submit, doesn't work. In theory, we got a log there, incorrect password. If we type the correct, test123. Okay, perfect. That's exactly what it should be doing, which means everything's working correctly. We actually have the very basic mechanism of you can set a master password, and then it's going to look for that master password and only let you in if it's correct, which is awesome. That's the basic premise of what you want for a password manager. Okay, so I just went ahead and added in a little bit of logic to embed our view controller into a navigation controller. Okay, there is a button there. It's really small, but it does actually take us to the next page, and our navigation controller is working correctly. Okay, that's awesome. So that works correctly, and we can now get to the login page. So we now have a mechanism for doing that. So now I think I want to start kind of spiking out what the login page is going to look like. Once again, I'm not really too worried about how it's going to look. It's basically just going to be a bunch of text fields. So I need to have kind of the name of the login, then a username, then a password, then probably a text view so that I can put some notes in there, just generic stuff. Okay, this time I'm going to be a little more specific and tell it that I want all of these variables to be created at the class level scope, just so they don't try to put them all in view did load, because it seems like that's kind of its default. Everything goes into view did load by default. Oh, interesting. It's actually just adding constraints without creating names for them, which works fine. I don't really need a bunch of things named leading constraint and trailing constraint. But we're going to run in and see what happens, because this thing has surprised me all day. And by all day, I mean for the past hour. Hit the plus button. I'm not seeing anything. Okay, I'm actually gonna have to read the code because, well, okay, the fields are set to white. So let's go back and grab that code where we set the view controller to be orange, and then we'll see if stuff's actually showing up. Oh, interesting. Okay, well, this is kind of the first instance of it doing something that's not really usable. It's kind of my own fault because I did tell it what constraints I wanted. I want to change one of the constraints, which is instead of having one to the top, I'm going to set them all to be centered, kind of like what I did on the first page. The middle one should be the username field. So the username field I'm going to have centered, and then the other two should be just right above it and right below it. Once again, this is not going to be the prettiest thing in the world, but in theory, that should solve our problem. Oh my gosh, it's regenerating all of the code. This is actually starting to get to the point where it's a little bit annoying because now I need to read through all of it just to pick out the one thing that I asked it to do. So okay, now all those fields are showing up in the middle, so it kind of looks like the initial page. Yep, all right, we got light gray views on a white background. We still need the notes section Then I still also need to have a save button on here. I figure the back button is just going to be kind of a cancel button here, and there'll be an explicit save button. Once again, not really great design because a lot of people will just accidentally hit the back button and it won't save their changes. For the purposes of keeping this simple, I'm going to keep that as a cancel button and add an explicit save button in the top right. But also, all this time I keep telling you that it's an expert in the Swift programming language. I have no idea if that's actually doing anything. It probably doesn't matter at all, but I just keep copy pasting it just in case it's doing something for me. But I'm going to keep doing it because you know what? Things have been going really well so far. I'm not trying to mess anything up. I'm just going to keep reaffirming that ChatGPT is an expert in the Swift programming language. Oh, wow. Okay, I was about to say I forgot to tell it to set the background color to be the F5, F5, F5 value, and I was like, I'm going to have to go back and do this again manually. But it says, in this updated code, we added the creation of Notes text view as a UI text view and set its background color to UI color, and then that whole thing, that's actually the same color as all the other ones. So it's kind of interesting because it actually did what I wanted it to do, but if I explicitly just wanted that to be the default white color, then this would have done the wrong thing. So that's impressive in that it actually kind of guessed what I wanted it to do, but at the same time, I didn't tell it to do that, and it just went ahead and guessed that anyway. So that's kind of interesting. This definitely feels like it's slowing down, which is a little bit of a problem because it's regenerating so much code that I already have and I don't need it to do. So like just responding to this one question, which was kind of pretty much a one-liner, it's going to take just about a minute, it seems like, to rewrite all of this code. I'm not going to look it up just because I want to kind of experiment and see if I can figure it out for myself, that or I'm just going to deal with it. But I am assuming there's a way that I can tell it, don't give me any of the previous stuff, just give me something that's completely standalone. Although in some cases that's actually really worked out in my favor because it remembers context from previous things. So I'm not sure I want that in all cases, but in a case like this, it's starting to get a little bit too slow. Okay, so that really wasn't that hard. I specifically told it, do not print out the contents of a full class, only the requested individual lines of code, and it actually gave me 3 separate blocks for name field, username field, and password field. At this point, it's a little past 3, so I'm probably gonna take my first break. I feel like I'm in a pretty good spot. Obviously visually, this is not the best looking app, but in terms of the basic functionality, I'm really impressed so far that I can basically create a master password and then I can use that to log back in. I have a table view that is currently set up with static, just dummy variables, but I think that's gonna be one of the next things we do, which is actually starting to populate logins. I started building the login page. We aren't using those values yet for anything, but soon we're gonna start creating logins. So I will see you all when I get back. And I'm back after playing musical chairs with the memory cards and swapping some batteries and all that good stuff. All right, let's get back into this. Okay, so I think the next thing that I really want to focus on is making sure that we can actually save logins and then see them showing up on the previous page in that table view. So this is a really complicated prompt. I haven't hit submit yet, so I don't know if it's gonna work, but basically I want a save button, and when that button is pressed, we're gonna collect all of the values in the different fields and put them into a login object. I haven't created a login class yet, so it's gonna have to know that it needs to create that and that it's gonna need certain properties on that are gonna pair up with each of the fields. And then we also need to save the key in user defaults and then a list of unique identifiers into a different key in user defaults and then dismiss the view controller. There's a lot of steps to this. I don't really think it's gonna be able to do all of these, but let's give it a go. Oh wow, so this actually worked pretty well. I created a login struct correctly and it's correctly pairing up the name field, username field, password field, and notes text view with each of the correct properties on the login. I can't believe that. I mean, if I was giving these instructions to a human, I feel like they might have trouble understanding kind of what I'm getting at because I didn't describe it that thoroughly. I mean, I did lay out each of the steps at least. I didn't say like, make this work and just save it for me. But at the same time, there's a good amount of ambiguity there to actually get this to compile and then not only compile, but also to work. All right, this is gonna be our first attempt at creating something for the table view actually dynamically. So let's see if it works. Login name, we are going to name this my login, username, my username, if I can spell that, password, my password. Here are some notes. Hit the save button. nothing happens. What did we forget? Oh, so I missed one thing related to the navigation controller. So in theory, if I can get it to manually add that line for me, this should work. Okay, so this was an example of I kind of fed it exactly what I wanted. Instead of using plain text, I kind of just said pop the view controller for the navigation controller, and then dismiss the current view controller. But it looks like that did work. Okay, so let's try that again. In theory, this actually did just save a couple of logins for us. So let's see if those got populated. They are. So I now have 3 named my login because I did this 3 times because I kept hitting the save button. So now let's create another one. Name it my login 2, my username 2, my password 2, my notes 2. So when I hit the save button, it doesn't update. That's because I need to reload the view controller on view did appear. We don't currently have an override of the view did appear method, so I will add that back in. But in theory, if we can get that page to reload, we can now see my login 2 showing up. So that is working correctly. We need to reload the data source, but that should be really easy to take care of. Now that I did that, in theory, every single time that we go back by hitting the save button or the back button or whatever, this should now update. So let's do this one more time. So that didn't work. I looked at the code. It actually makes sense that it didn't work because the loading functionality where we're actually pulling from user defaults is happening in view did load, which means that basically we're only doing that once. We're not doing that every single time that we hit that back button or that save button. So if I move that code from view did load into view did appear, in theory that should fix our problem. Yeah, now that things are starting to get a little bit more complicated instead of just kind of adding labels and stuff like that onto the screen, this is really where having some existing knowledge of Swift and iOS development is starting to come into play. Knowing that view did appear is going to get called every time that you pop back onto a page instead of view did load, and then also just kind of knowing where to put all these blocks of code, since I'm kind of starting to move things around instead of just directly taking whatever it's giving me. My login 4, 4th time's the charm, right? Right. Well, it did do what I wanted it to do, but it also reloaded everything else because I'm just appending it and I'm not deleting everything that's in the logins. I'm only appending to it. So, okay. This is starting to take quite a couple iterations because this is going to be the 5th time. I now need to generate a line from ChatGPT that basically says reinitialize table view to be an empty array. So that should be pretty straightforward. Okay, that's what we wanted. Only took 5 tries, but that's a really good sign. So now when we hit the save button, it's getting repopulated. And in theory, we could just keep doing this over and over again, adding more things in, and that list is going to keep updating. So by default, we don't have delete functionality. I think they'll be really easy to add in because we have a couple extra instances of my login here that we really don't need to have. Okay, so that's part of the logic that I'm going to need to do, but I kept it simple just so the prompt wouldn't get too complicated. I'm also going to need some logic in here so that I can actually update the login keys and remove the key of the login that we're deleting from the list of IDs. Now, I think these should be in the same order. So in theory, all I have to do is from the IDs list, remove at indexpath.row like it's currently doing from the logins list. So now I should only have one instance of my login. Now if I go back and I go back forward again, there's still only one instance of my login and the table has been reloaded, which means this actually did work correctly. And those other 2 instances of my login were deleted. Okay, so this way the biggest thing that we're probably missing is that we can't actually click into any of our logins. We can create one, we can see the list of them, but when we click on it, all it really does is just highlight it. We can't tap to go to the next page to see those details or edit them. So at this point, we're gonna add the ability to tap on a login and automatically take us to the next page, but then we need to tell that next page which login we want loaded up, which shouldn't be too hard. Basically, all we have to do is set some variables on the next page to say this is going to be the unique ID that we're referencing for that particular login so that it knows to pull the data for that login and populate the fields accordingly. Okay, so at a glance, this looks like it did just about what I wanted. Basically, when someone clicks on an element in the table view, I need it to trigger the segue to go to the next page. But before we actually do that, I want to update a variable on that login page saying what the selected key is. And I was pretty vague about the details of how to do that. I did say to do it when we were preparing for the segue, which was kind of a hint to ChatGPT about what I wanted it to do. But it seems like it picked up on exactly what my intent was, just based off of glancing at this code. Okay, so everything's building now. The next thing we need to do is go back to the login view controller and basically add a check saying that if the ID key has some sort of value, that means that we need to load in from user defaults ahead of time and populate things into those fields instead of just having the placeholders. We're also going to need to add some logic in on the saving side, which is instead of saving it as a new unique thing. So if I'm clicking into my login 3, I shouldn't have 2 my login 3s. It should be smart enough to realize I need to update my login 3 instead of creating a duplicate of it and then saving the duplicate. Okay, so I guess I missed something because it's not actually triggering the segue to the next page when I click on one of the items in the table view. So let's see what's going on. Okay, so it turns out the problem is something that ChatGPT just didn't set in the first place, which is the table view delegate. So once I was able to get ChatGPT to generate code for that, I was able to stitch that in. And now if we give this another try, in theory, I think our problem is going to be solved. So I'm going to click into my login 4, and now all my stuff is automatically populated, which is good. Now, we still can't actually save this stuff without it creating a duplicate, so if I do that now, and I go back, there's now gonna be multiple my login 4s. We'll just delete the other one because we don't want that. Okay, I accidentally inverted my logic here, checking that ID key was equal to key instead of was not equal to key, but I think now we should be good to go in terms of being able to make edits. So let's try that out. Let's try to edit my login 2 to make it my login A, and now we have my login A, and all the values inside it have been updated. We can now update our logins without creating duplicate entries, which is really nice because that's one of the key things you would need to do if you were actually using a password manager. You would want to be able to go in, see your information, and make adjustments to it. So at this point, there isn't too much left that we really need to do. I think beyond some of the fluff things that I might end up doing, especially some of the styling stuff, I really don't want to leave it looking like this. One thing I do want to try, because I can manually tell it to do certain things to stylize things, is to see if I just tell it to make things look prettier, what it tries to do, if it just gives me the same plain things that it's been giving me thus far, or if it's actually going to do things that it thinks are more aesthetic than this. So I guess we'll give that a go. All right, just for fun, let's see what happens if I tell it to create a pretty submit button for me. Oh wow, it actually did give me a bunch of stuff here. Oh, that's really annoying. It created a button named submit button. I specifically asked it to create a button named submit. Here, let's try that again. I haven't had a problem with this the entire afternoon, but for some reason, it keeps creating something called submit button, even when I keep specifically telling it I want it to be named submit, which is fine and it doesn't really matter. But everywhere else in my code, this is called submit. And if I switch it to submit button, then I just have to update all of the other pieces of code, which normally wouldn't be a problem, but for this, it's just really annoying. There you go. Okay, if you're forceful with it, it will do what you want it to do. I specifically said create a button. It must be named submit, not submit button, and make it look pretty. And it did obey that. Okay, so clearly that's not exactly what I had in mind. What did I do wrong? Okay, so clearly just telling it to make something pretty doesn't completely work. It definitely still needs some tuning and tweaking, but it did do a pretty good job of making something that looks decent. At least it's a blue button, it has rounded corners, it has a shadow on it, it's readable. So I'm going to try to apply that logic to some of the other things in here to just make everything a little bit prettier. I don't have too much more time, so I'm just going to focus on trying to make this look a little bit nicer. I'm probably not going to bother adding in some of the other features because I'm not going to do anything with this project once I'm done with this video. But let's just see what I can get done in about the next half hour. Okay, so at this point, it's been about 4 hours. I definitely could go on for a little bit longer, but I feel like I've kind of proved out the main thing here, which is that you can definitely build an app using only ChatGPT. It is not necessarily the best way to build an app, but I think the real big takeaway out of all this is that using ChatGPT as a tool to make it easier for you to write code is definitely incredibly viable. Like, I think in this 4 hours, it became very apparent to me that the way I've been writing my Swift code has been very inefficient. So for my normal apps that I produce just kind of for fun, I'm definitely going to start using ChatGPT, not exclusively like the way I was for this video, but I am definitely going to start incorporating it to help with some of the boilerplate stuff or things that maybe I would normally look up on Stack Overflow. I'm just going to try ChatGPT first, see what it gives me, and then if I need to, I'll go digging further. So that's my app. Obviously, it's nothing special, and I'll probably never touch this piece of code again after I finish this video, but the fact that I was able to make this in less than 4 hours and didn't write a single line of code along the way is kinda crazy. I know this was a little bit of a different type of video for me. I haven't done an experiment like this in a while, so if you enjoyed it, definitely let me know by subscribing and leaving a comment down below. I have a couple other experiment ideas in the works, but if you have other experiments that you'd like to see me try, let me know down in the comments and I can see if I can make those happen. Anyways, I think that's enough of me rambling for now, so that's it. Thanks so much for watching, and I will catch you guys in the next one.